Okay, we get to do a really fun activity today and learn about some things today. This is like, I don't know, sometimes I can be really nerdy when it comes to words, and so I love Scrabble. But I also love what we're going to do next with Dr. Laleh. We're going to talk about analyzing coaching conversations. This is coaching conversations, obviously, is something that you're having on a regular basis. So really super excited today to be able to nerd out with Dr. Laleh when it comes to learning more about coaching conversations and what that looks like. So Dr. Laleh, thanks so much for being here today to help us out with this.
So good morning, everyone. I'm feeling very Michigan-y today because I'm wearing earrings that one of my dear colleagues from here gave me, and they're Michigan-made. And then I'm wearing, are these Petoskey stones that another dear colleague gave me. So I'm feeling very Michigan today and looking for more Michigan things that are beautiful, in addition to all of you. So today we're going to talk about coaching conversations because that's kind of the essence of our work, especially when we're talking about coaching cycles, which is a pathway that we're doing in the afternoon. Some of us are doing in the afternoon. Okay, yesterday, we really looked at the data from the coaching cycle reports, and I have to say I got another set of coaching cycle reports yesterday, so I appreciate that. The numbers are growing. And what we found in terms of outcomes for teacher practice and outcomes for student learning, if we look at the research, we realize that grouping matters, that the research shows that individual coaching tends to bring us better results in terms of teacher practice and student learning than either large group coaching alone or small group coaching alone. And we saw yesterday even the impact of small group coaching plus individual coaching has more impact than just small group coaching here in Michigan. So we had an example right here from Michigan. We also know that the duration that you spend with teachers, the amount of time you spend with teachers is important for outcomes, that 14 to 16 hours. Coaches who spend more time with teachers have better results than coaches who spend less time with teachers. Sustained interactions, and this is one of those things like over time, frequent interactions over time. So maybe you're meeting once a week for 6 weeks, but many times it's better if you're meeting 3 times a week for 6 weeks because you're actually working with the teacher in the midst of their lessons as opposed to just checking in once a week or planning once a week. So these sustained, frequent interactions really lead to better outcomes. And then what types of coaching activities? And we've talked long about the co-planning, modeling, conferencing, observation, and focusing on assessment. That is not in the Coaching Essential Practice 6, focus on assessment, because we sprinkled assessment all throughout. But remember that work with assessment, especially as you help teacher use those results for instruction, really does impact teacher learning and student learning. So these are 4 things that are really important, and they're fairly easy to measure, right? But let's think about this scenario. You have 2 coaches. They're both doing individual coaching. They both are working with a teacher for the same amount of time. They see that teacher frequently, the same frequency and sustained, and they're doing all those great coaching activities. But Coach B has more teacher uptake of practice, and that has led to higher student learning than Coach A. So we obviously know that those 4 things are not the only 4 things that impact how well your coaching goes. And so what I'd like you to do at your table just for a couple of minutes is to think about, talk to a partner or talk at your table, however you feel inclined. What other factors might have contributed to the more positive coaching outcomes from coach and teacher B? So not the ones we talked about, not those 4 of duration and individual coaching and sustainability and those coaching activities, but what else might have led? So let's just take a couple of minutes at your table to kind of make a little list, and we'll see what we come up with. Erin is just going to rove to a few tables and get some input about what might be some possible other factors that lead to increased teacher practice and student learning. So if you want to raise your hand to contribute, if you're close to Erin, look at those hands. Everybody put up their hands. Every table had a discussion, so all you have to do is say, I think this might be one of those factors. We don't know.
Our team said relationships with the teachers as number 1.
And can you just explain a little bit? Coach A might and Coach B might.
Well, maybe Coach, I forgot which one did.
B did better.
So maybe she had better relationships and had more time to build the relationships with the teachers at that school as opposed to the other coach. So maybe that had an effect.
Okay, so certainly that idea of we built that trust, we built respect, we have this background together, great. Who else? There's one back there.
We talked about in like the co-planning, who's making the decisions, like are they talking through, like maybe Coach B and Teacher B, it's more joint and teacher input, but is Coach A kind of saying do this, 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 so it just becomes a checklist for Teacher A.
Okay, great. So kind of that quality of your conferencing. What does your conferencing look like? Great.
I think another factor related to the quality is your ability to keep the conversation really focused. Sometimes other adults, they just crave adult conversation. And so you might have an equal amount of time, but how much of that time was really focused on your goal and what the purpose of the meeting is that day?
Okay, great. So focus. Anything else? Those are 3 great ones. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, but really what this shows me is I don't really need to be here. So I think I'm done. So some possible other factors, look at the first one. Relationship between the coach and the teacher. That was our first one. The third one, focus of the work. In addition to how much focus, sometimes some work is harder than others. You know, if Coach B is working on implementing a fairly scripted sequential phonics instruction, and Coach A and B, Coach A and Teacher A are working on summarization skills or inferencing skills with their students, it could be that Coach A and B need more time, need more information than Coach B. So it could be, how difficult is the focus of that work? You have to consider that. Nobody talked about this, but the expertise of the coach, especially in the area that you're working. You know, some coaches are really skilled in this area and others are just coming up to speed in whatever the focus is, just like the teacher is. Sometimes it's really co-learning. Like, I don't know that much about this either, but together we're going to figure it out. And in the same way, the expertise of the teacher, for example, you know, maybe the teacher has some great ideas and has tried several things, is on the right path, and you're just moving along with Coach B. But Coach A, that teacher really is just starting at the basic point of, remember the CBAM unit of, I'm aware of this strategy or this practice, but I don't have much information about it yet, and so that's where I am. So all of these things are contribute to how successful you are and how fast you are successful, how quickly you are successful. And there's probably many other things as well. The last one I put down was the quality or the effectiveness of coaching, which somebody talked about, is like, how does your conversation go? And how do we know if we're leading the teacher when the teacher really has a lot of ideas on his or her own? And so this is what we're going to look at a little bit more today. Notice that these are all much harder to measure, get valid measures of the relationship between the coach and the teacher, which work is harder, and how you could record and see how much time is actually spent on that focus during the conference. So that's something that's easier to measure maybe. That expertise of the coach and teacher, not always easy to measure. And let's look at the last one about conferencing. What I'd like you to do right now is to talk at your table or talk with a partner about how you are currently analyzing your coaching conversations. What are you doing to analyze your conversations to make sure they're high quality and to make sure that you know what you're going to do next time you converse with somebody? So and even if you're not doing it right now, you could add ideas of, if I had the time to analyze my coaching conversations, this is what I would probably do. So just take a couple of minutes at your table to talk about how are you analyzing your coaching conversations. How are you analyzing your coaching conversations? There's somebody in the back. Who is it? Shannon, maybe?
One thing that we talked about several things. You want me to just share one?
Sure, share two.
Share two, okay. We talked about how we use that analyzing our coaching conversation after we've had the conversation to analyze how that went and then prepare for that next conversation. But then we also talked about how we're analyzing the conversation within the conversation. We're looking at the questions that we're asking and analyzing it that way to see the directions that we need to go to be successful in that conversation in the present time.
Okay. So on the spot, analyzing to know where you're going, and then reflecting back afterward. Who else had some ideas about how you do that reflecting or what you do to analyze coaching conversations?
So my coaching partner and I, we do a virtual coaching model where we use a lot of video and we ask the teachers to record their lessons, and that's a really vulnerable process for a lot of teachers. So we kind of decided, you know what, we're gonna turn the tables and we're gonna do that with our own coaching conversation. So with the teacher's permission, we recorded the conversations and then we share them with each other. So I send my coaching conversations to my coaching partner, and she might give me some feedback of different ways that I could improve those conversations through, cognitive coaching or different resources I could have shared or such through that. And at first it was really, really vulnerable and I felt really nervous to do it, but we have this culture now where it's comfortable to share and grow, so.
What a great idea, right? That peer review, if you're working in a district where you're close by, or even share videos and give feedback. What else are people doing to really look carefully at your conversations? I know people are doing other things. We might have to volunteer somebody here.
Hi, one of the things that we do is it's 4 times a year. We pair up with a different coach and we observe them and they observe us. And then we spend a half day talking to each other about what we observed and asking questions. And before we do that, we also have like a pre-meeting to talk so they understand like what they're gonna see in the coaching session, and to give them anything, like if somebody was observing me, if there was anything specific that I wanted them to notice and to give me feedback on. And we did that 4 times a year.
Okay, great. So I think that we'll look at some of these, you'll see some of these ideas as we talk. Lots of you are talking about people making anecdotal notes about your conversations. So when you're talking to each other, you've obviously taken some anecdotal notes. The last group has a more structured thing where you have specific look-fors, and you do that. You can look at things like talk time by teachers and coaches. And the Heineke study that I presented a couple years ago really showed that at that time, coaches were dominating talk time in terms of introducing topics, in terms of giving suggestions, in terms of really adding to the conversation, and teachers were kind of not on the, didn't contribute a lot, except when they could get a word in edgewise. And so, you know, sometimes you just have to take that video that you have and, or an audio, you can get an audio conversation, you know, just on your phone, and you say, I really want to analyze my own coaching, and this is one way I can do that. And just see how much time is the teacher talking versus how much time are you talking, and the quality of that talk. We've often talked about stances. Again, analyzing, are you doing facilitating? That has a lot probably to do with teacher time. If you're doing a lot of facilitating, the teacher's going to be talking a lot more. Collaborating, joining ideas together, each of you contributing ideas, you're probably going to be about 50-50 in terms of the talk time. But if you're in a more consulting mode, which some teachers need, don't forget, some teachers need some consulting, you might be doing a little bit more of the talking, but you're still giving teachers options with that consulting. So you might analyze in terms of what kind of stances are you using throughout and how do they change? And then you might actually look at questioning. What does your questioning look like? Are you questioning for more information so that the teacher's talking? What does that look like in your classroom? Or, I've never seen that practice. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? For clarification, I do that all the time, like, I think I heard this, but can you tell me more? Because I just don't have a clear picture yet. Or for a reflection, you know, how did that work for this set of students? It worked basically the whole class, it's a whole class lesson, it went well and everything, but what about this particular set of students? So reflect on that. And then that specific coaching language that we always are talking about. Paraphrasing, are you doing a lot of good paraphrasing but not overdoing it? So again, that you're taking time from that conversation. Are you affirming teachers when, you know, by either nodding or saying, oh yeah, I noticed that the students were doing exactly what you said, providing specific examples, it was effective when, and giving choice of options. So those are some things, and we heard that from people, that they are looking at talk time, anecdotal notes, questioning, all of those things with a focus. So you have a transcript in front of you, and I'd like you to examine that transcript in terms of some of the methods that we've discussed or that you discussed at the tables or that you would like to look at. My first instinct is that just take a few minutes to read through the transcript. This is a real coaching conversation. Read through the transcript, then kind of mark it up and look for things that we were talking about, such as paraphrasing, stances, questioning, talk time, specific coaching language, other little notes that you might want to write along the column, or anything else that you noticed. Because after you have some time to do that, you're going to turn to a partner and I'll give you just a heads up about when it's time to turn to a partner and talk about the conversation was effective because, or what could have been more effective if. So let us, right now, just take a couple of minutes first, read through the transcript, and start marking things about that coaching conversation that you noticed, that made you think, and then made you think about, okay, the next time we have the conversation, or how am I helping the teacher come to some decision-making? We're always looking for teachers to be the decision makers. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to work on this, either on your own. Some of you like just to do it on your own, or you could actually code the coaching conversation with a partner. Are there any questions about what I'm asking you to do? It's clear as mud? Okay. Okay, some excellent conversations, some new ahas for me. One of the things that I think is so interesting is this was a video conversation, and I made it into a transcript, and I'm just wondering the difference of watching a video and listening to audio and doing a transcript could be very different. So some of your comments were like, oh no, that isn't how it came across in the video. So maybe just having audio transcripts, you have to realize that you might be missing something. But we're gonna do a little roving about what we found, just some basic ideas about how you analyzed and what you thought in terms of effectiveness. It was effective when, or it could have been more effective if. So whatever you'd like to share with Erin as she roves around and touches you on the shoulder and says, it's your turn. Or we could do a few people. I'm sure we have a lot of volunteers. There was a lot of good discussions at the tables I was at. So who would like to share something? And it can just be like, it can be related to the talk time, to the stances, to the kinds of questions people looked at, to specific coaching language, or anything else that you want to bring up.
So at the beginning of the conversation, I think my colleague and I were talking about the dominance of the coach, but how that might be helpful to do some cognitive lifting for the teacher and get the teacher into the conversation. And then by the end, the teacher did do some very clear thinking and reflecting and owning of what they had done. So even though the coach may have been very dominant at the beginning, you could still see by the end that the teacher was an integral part of the process and that the teacher had owned a lot of the information.
Yes, and I think that one of the tables said you can tell that they're well into their coaching cycle. And so this is true. They have been working on these peak paragraphs for several weeks. And the coach, I think, was just trying to paraphrase what they had done together. So let's look at how far we've come on that first page, and now let's move along. So some people thought it was a lot of overwork on the coach's part, that the coach could have asked the teacher to summarize where we have come from this point, and that would have let the coach know a little bit more about what the teacher sees as their progress. So there's different ways to look at that. The coach may have decided, I'm just going to paraphrase so we can get right into what we need. Remember, you as a coach may have a lot more time to have these conversations than the teacher has. So we always say, try to keep your coaching conversations to 15 or 20 minutes, or you'll exhaust the teacher and they won't want to meet with you weekly if you're going to take all of their prep time on a day when they've got 10 other things they have to do during that prep time as well. Another person?
I'm not sure if it's just because I'm reading it, but it didn't feel very much like a partnership. It felt very much, we talked that that coach had an idea of what he or she wanted to happen, and it didn't feel like the teacher had choice. She might have arrived there, but it was kind of more fed to her. And so it felt far more like consulting in the guise of coaching.
So let's have a raise of hands of people who felt that there was more consulting in this after the paraphrase, more consulting than collaborating or facilitating. Okay, so about half of you, or a good third of you think that. So it's interesting, again, how you are looking at somebody else's conversation and deciding that it might be more consulting. Can you pick specific places where the coach said, this is what you should be doing? Or, you know, this is a great idea, as opposed to asking the teacher what they should be doing. One more, Erin.
We thought the part where we agreed that it felt a little bit more like consulting, where the teacher's asking, you could tell that they had a good relationship because the teacher did feel comfortable to say, what does that mean? The teacher felt comfortable enough to ask for clarity in the conversation, but later the coach says, I think they could handle it. And we have all faced that too, where teachers think their students might not be able to do it, and we know if you have the right, you know, things in place, they could do it. So we said maybe asking a question like, well, what do you think they need to be able to complete it independently? And then that might arrive at the same goal that you're looking for, but it gives the teacher ownership in the process.
Okay, great question. You know, why is it that you're a little hesitant that they couldn't handle it? Now notice that the coach did go back around at the end of the conversation. This coach decided, I'm going to leave it. She's not ready to talk about this until we move on and look at what we're going to actually be doing. But at the end of the conversation, the coach moved on. Coach returned to that question and said, so how do you want to do it? Is it totally independent? Is it whatever? And at that point then, the teacher made that decision about, yes, totally independent, me no talking. That's going to be really hard. So you have to, as a coach, decide, am I going to really spend time on this now, or are we going to move along, and am I going to return to this toward the end of our conversation? So maybe just take some little notes about, I'm not going to push this right now. Or, that was a terrific question that you brought up about, you know, to me, I think they could handle it. I've been in your classroom enough. But what's your hesitancy about that? So a great follow-up question. So we could talk about this transcript. It's interesting that most of you try to look at it from a kind of a deficit, what's missing perspective, as opposed to what are all the good things that are going on in this conversation. So, you know, if I asked you to go back and just highlight the good things that are going on in this conversation that you want to continue doing, your conversation might be a little bit different. And it's, I think, you know, it's just kind of part of coaching, part of teaching. We always go, when you ask this question, and I never suggest that you ask this question in a conversation, how do you think it went? I mean, the teacher just zooms right into, well, this didn't go very well, and this didn't, and you just never get into, but 2/3 of this lesson worked. You know, you're focusing on this little part that we can work on. So sometimes I think we do that to ourselves too. What didn't go so well? But what coaching moves did we make that really went well? So I have to move on because Dr. Duke will kill me if I'm not done. in time to let her talk. And I know you all love to hear Dr. Duke, so I don't want to take time away from her. But I do want to then bring this conversation around to this idea of teacher agency, and to make sure that the teacher is very involved. So if we look at this idea of teacher agency, and Dana Robertson, who I've done a lot of research with ILA has really been looking at teacher agency and coaching conversations. And the definition he uses is not his own definition, but it's in his piece that he writes. Teachers who exercise agency in their own instructional planning and implementation iteratively demonstrate the capacity for autonomous action, intentionality, as they strive to accomplish what they set out to achieve, and the reflectivity to adjust and monitor their plans as needed. So if we look at those three key pieces, that we want coaches to be ready to take autonomous action. Are we looking for places where teachers are coming up with their own ideas in this conversation, or in any conversation you have with a teacher? Or as a start, can they articulate why they're not going to choose an option that we suggest? Because that's autonomous. I'm saying you could try this or this or this. They're all research-supported practices. Which one do you think would work with you, with your style, and with your students at this time, and why? So autonomous action is, I'm picking number 2, door number 2, thank you very much. That's autonomous action. In terms of intentionality, are we having teachers voice what their intentions are going to be regarding instruction? So you're talking and the teacher says, I think I'm going to try this next. That's intentionality. They have made a decision. It's also autonomous action, but they are very intent on what they're going to do. And are we affirming places where coaches are showing that their thinking is careful, step-by-step planning? That's intentionality. And of course, we talk about reflectivity. Are we looking for ways that we're promoting reflection? So those three things are really important: autonomous action, intentionality, and reflectivity. There's also this efficacy doubt that when teachers say, oh, I'm not really sure I know much about this, or I'm not really sure what to do, or that means they're ready to kind of converse about that. They're ready to think about suggestions that you might make, because they don't feel that skilled. I know so many people in the Writing Pathways group talk about, I'm not a good writer. I don't think I can, teach writing very well. Well, if you can admit that, then you're looking for ways to teach writing better than you're currently doing. This is just an example from a school that took up vocabulary as a school to enhance students' vocabulary. And so these quotes come from that school where they're talking about vocabulary work. And I would say for a lot of people, vocabulary is not a strength, even though they've probably read Dr. Wright's great book about vocabulary. And one of the reasons they are reading that book is because embedding vocabulary work within their instruction on a daily basis is maybe not a strength of theirs. The other thing that Dana talks about is principled resistance, and I think that sometimes we don't think enough about this as coaches. When teachers say something to you and they seem like they're resistant or challenging, it's because they have a principle that a strong belief that they have, and they are going to resist what you're asking because they have a practice that they have used, and they have evidence that it works with their students. So in that case, you might ask, I'd love to come and see this because maybe it would work for others, especially if the evidence is there of student learning. but also maybe it wouldn't work for others, because you all know that what works for one teacher does not necessarily work for another teacher. And it's kind of this teacher-driven success factor, like my kids will do this because I'm doing it this way, but this teacher over here could do it the same way and it doesn't work the same. So that's why those evidence-based practices within classrooms are a little difficult. So I just think about this idea of principled resistance. Why are teachers resisting some of the things we're saying? And can they state why they're saying it? And then can we take what they're saying and either agree with them that what you're doing is working with your students and I'm seeing the results and the evidence, or if we change that practice a little bit more to match research-supported practices, would student learning be even more higher? So I think that this idea of principled resistance is interesting. This example, like some of this stuff works well for others, and I'm just like, how am I going to make this work for me in my teaching style? I don't want to just do something because it's a process. Here's a juicy word and try and figure out its meaning. But I put the new word on the wall and then you know, and then she goes on. It's like, okay, you put the word on the wall. This is where the coach is saying, and tell me a little bit more what happens after you put the word on the wall. Because maybe she's doing really good things, but we don't get it from here. So she has a little bit of principled resistance to what her colleagues are doing. She doesn't like that idea, but she likes this idea of making sure that the vocabulary words are visible to her students in some way, which obviously she doesn't think her colleagues are doing. But then what are you doing in addition to putting them on the wall with your students for vocabulary work? So that seems like something I could do naturally and not feel like I was forcing it. But we don't know what the it is. And so this is a coaching opportunity, right, to ask clarification and expansion. So sometimes, here's another example of a principled resistance. Two teachers are talking with the coach, and the coach has reiterated to them what the school's policy on writing is, and that you're going to give them prompts and you're going to score them against a rubric. And the teachers are saying, well, if we're teaching them to be good writers, good writing is good writing. And I mean, a score can't always dictate that. So, you know, we're scoring them across a rubric, but we're seeing that this rubric doesn't match our idea of good writing. So again, this coach says something like, I can see that not everybody agrees with me. Okay. But I think it's important, and remember, we're always trying to get across that I think, but it seems to be effective, maybe when students learn to write the prompts and demand in a time situation. It seems to be effective in terms of preparing them for the state tests. It seems to be effective in terms of getting them to start writing. What is it effective in terms of? But I think this is a situation where the coach can go back to the teachers and say, well, what do you mean by good writing? If we're not using a rubric, what are you using to determine what's good writing? And so this principled resistance to your idea doesn't mean then the coach should say, well, you have to use prompts, that's a school policy, but why are you resistant to that idea? And what does that term mean to you? Those questions for clarification, I think, are so important. So just before, I'm just moving along here. Sometimes there are challenges that when you're putting something new together with teachers, they say things like, this was a school that, as I said, was working on vocabulary, and so the teacher said, so now it's my guided reading time that I'm letting go so I can have vocabulary. Okay, we can't do vocabulary during small reading groups. What are we losing? Or, well, we have this comprehension goal and a vocabulary focus and all the other stuff, and it's just finding all the time to fit in and really do good service for those words too. So this teacher's like feeling overwhelmed with the trying to get vocabulary instruction, even though the school determined as a group that that was a focus that they wanted. It wasn't imposed upon them, they decided. I think that we have to go back and remember our fancy CBAM, concerns-based adoption model, and realizing that when you introduce something new, you often have this management issue about how can I fit it all in? Where does it go? In addition, this vocabulary focus was new. There were a lot of new ideas given. So it gets into that personal level of, well, how is this going to impact me? What new skills am I going to have to learn? So you're always thinking as a coach when a teacher has a challenge and says, but this is difficult. You have to think about, okay, where on the CBAM movement toward change are they? And how can I facilitate them to get through that particular challenge by realizing what they're actually saying? So what I'd like you to do in the next few minutes is to re-examine the transcript that you have in front of you and reread or look for evidence of teacher autonomy, teacher intentionality, challenges that they are facing, reflection you probably have in there already, and efficacy doubt. And are there ways that the coach could have supported autonomy, intentionality, and reflection, that there were missed opportunities? Now, some of you already have some of that down, so you can just put a box around it and say, this works for teacher agency as well. We're really promoting teacher agency. But as you go through, really look at what the teacher's saying. Are there examples of autonomous action, of intentionality, and of her talking about her efficacy doubts? So just take about 5 or 6 minutes to actually look through with a different lens, a new eye on teacher agency. Erin, can we just get a couple of examples of places in the coaching conversation where you thought there were examples of teacher agency or opportunities for the coach to prompt for teacher agency? Because really, we're looking at teacher decision-making this week. Yesterday, we looked at the questions you could ask for coaching cycles, and today we're looking at the kinds of conversations. And Cheryl over here just reminded us that we're not privy to everything that happened beforehand. So if you are doing peer coaching, you really need to spend a good amount of time saying, what have you already done with this teacher? So I have a clear picture when I'm just watching you this one day, what you're talking about. And in this case, maybe not realizing that the teacher and this coach have already really taught each of these parts of the peak paragraph. They've already taught point and analysis and point, evidence, analysis, and conclusion. And now the students are at the point where they're into the more independent level. So there's a hand up to talk about places where you saw teacher agency. I heard conversations. Or where you saw opportunities or missed opportunities for teacher agency. So Erin, go to one of your favorites. Oh, there's somebody.
So we had talked about how toward the end of the conversation, the teacher was saying, okay, fully independent, me not talking, that's going to be hard not to talk. That seems like an example of that efficacy doubt where maybe she's open to having more conversation about what support she might need to sustain that part of the goal.
Okay, so this is when the coach comes back around and says, so what are you going to do? Is it going to be independent? And she says, yes, but It's more efficacy doubt about, can I let them do it independently, right? I'm so used to guiding them. So it's both efficacy doubt, but she is taking some, she's also intentional. Okay, I made a decision. Kind of autonomous action. You know, he's forcing that autonomous action on her. Another example.
Okay, so to go off of what you had just said, on page 2, where she says, well, what do you want, the coach says? I feel like I don't know, because it is not completely independent if I am probing, but what do you want them to be? Do you want them to be independent? I mean, is that what you'd like? I think that's a little too much right now, because it's how, I could see that. Do you think they could handle it? I think so. So I feel like it's a mix between that doubt of like, she's kind of going back and forth like, I don't know. And she says, do you think they can handle it? Like, she's not really sure. And then also it's a challenge she's facing, because she's not sure if the students are able to do it and be independent, and she herself, so she's kind of doubting herself and the students' ability at this point. So it's kind of a challenge she's facing, and kind of going back and forth with the coach as well.
Yeah, and I think as Janice said when I was walking around the tables, they're all kind of intertwined, right? If you're talking about reflection, they're reflecting about a challenge, or they're reflecting about their intentions, or they're reflecting about some autonomous action that they'd like to take, or they're not sure what autonomous action they'd like to take. So one more example, and then just...
I liked where the coach brings the teacher back to the data, where the coach says, I think so, yeah. I think the critical thing might be feedback. As you look at what you got there from Rondell, for example, can we just sort of go through how you would go through it? And then as that goes along, the teacher figures out what the next step is going to be.
Okay, that reflecting on, well, he did everything on the rubric, but it's really a crummy piece of writing. If you just, if you're looking at it, it doesn't make sense. He's got 4 sentences, but they're not coherent, or they don't make any sense together. So there's something missing from this rubric, and then they adjust that rubric. So that reflection is helping her look at this challenge of what in her mind writing should look like. That whole idea before of one of the examples that Dr. Robertson has of, well, it's not good writing. Well, good writing doesn't make sense to her. That's one of her elements. So we don't really have a lot of measurement for teacher agency, but you might be able to think, okay, are there just a few examples of teacher agency in this where the coach is eliciting more instances? Is it really developing? Are you seeing quite a few places of efficacy doubt, of stating challenges, of stating intentions, of thinking about intentions? Or do you just see this throughout the conversation that the teacher is really taking charge? So can you just raise your hand if you think that this, just based on this small piece, that you think this is an emerging level of teacher agency? You think this teacher's emerging? Not seeing too many, a few of those. How about developing? Seeing a few more. How about strong teacher agency? And lots of you have efficacy doubt. You're just not sure. If I were, and I'm just one of you, but I would have been in the developing group. I think there are instances where she's saying, yes, I can do this, or this needs to be done. My students need this. I'm going to take charge. And remember, there's one area where she said, analysis isn't still clear to them. I didn't do a very good job, probably. We need to go back around, and I need to do analysis again like we did evidence, because they had already gone through like a gradual release of responsibility about teaching evidence, but hadn't really done the analysis as well. So some things to consider then, transcribe or video, take a video and actually transcribe it, or know it well enough that you don't need to transcribe it, and look for evidence of teacher agency in the teacher's comments. Let's look for the positive, affirming kinds of things that teachers are doing already that we can build on. And look for places where you fostered teacher agency in your comments. So this goes back to what somebody said earlier about as we're going through the conversation, we always have to think about, what am I doing right now to help the teacher move forward? What am I doing right now to foster teacher agency, that autonomous action, intentionality, and reflectivity? And look for places where you may have missed that opportunity and you could have fostered it a little bit more. So I'm kind of challenging you to really take the time this year to really analyze your coaching conversations, not just to reflect on them afterward and write down a few notes, but to really purposely look at the language that you're using, the language that the teachers are using, and how that is adding to the quality of teacher uptake of good research-supported practices and adding to the quality of student learning. So just really, I think yesterday's work on how to build a good coaching cycle and what are some of the questions you have to ask teachers really builds right into this idea of we have to really think much more about our own coaching conversations and how we as coaches can improve them, but also what we're doing well. Don't forget that we always want to look at what's already working and how can we build on that. So thank you very much.
It is now break, and we will have Dr. Duke with us after break. So enjoy break. Thank you.